Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon and welcome to today's public forum. My name's Kate Simons and I'm the chairperson of the Essential Services Commission. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands we're meeting on today. For me, that's the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and elders of other communities who may be here today. I'd like to acknowledge the connection that Indigenous Australians hold to country and culture. Well, welcome to today's public forum to discuss our draft decision on the Victorian Default Offer 2022 to 23. I think our third review since the default offer was introduced back in 2019. Before we get into the session, just some quick housekeeping. Just to let you know, we are recording this forum today, including any comments and questions. We will post the video online for anyone who could not be here today as well. If you have any questions or comments while someone's talking or during presentations, please feel free to type them into the chat box so we can respond or put your hand up virtually if you'd like to talk as well. It'd be great if you could keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking to avoid feedback and background noise. And finally, there will be time at the end of this forum for questions in a Q&A session as well. I'd just like to introduce some senior leaders and commission staff who are here with us today. I think all of their cameras on and perhaps give us a wave. Our Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation, Marcus Crudden. Our Director of Victorian Energy Upgrades, Jeff Supply. Our Senior Regulatory Manager, Dean Wickington. And the Victorian Default Offer project team led by Mayank Grover. I'd also like to make a special thank you and welcome to Jeff Hargraves from Red Energy and Lumo Energy and Jared Len from the Victorian Council of Social Service, who will be both presenting today. I understand we have about 60 or so attendees for today's forum, including representatives from retailers and embedded network operators. So great to see so many faces around the virtual screen. I understand we've also got observers from government and other regulators, including the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and consumer advocate representatives from West Justice Consumer Action Law Centre and Uniting VicTas. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you here today. Well, I know there's a lot happening at the moment in energy market regulation, so I would like to thank everyone for attending this session today and making the time, and also for participating in our consultations on a range of work at the moment, such as the review of the implementation of the payment difficulty framework, and of course providing the cost data for the Victorian Default Offer, which we're here to talk about today. As the chairperson of the Commission, I'm very keen to uphold our obligation as set by the government under the pricing order to establish a fair price for electricity that is accessible to all. I do have some other commitments this afternoon, but I still wanted to take some time to welcome all attendees to the forum, as well as our presenters. So thank you in advance, Jared and Jeff. I will be leaving you in the capable hands of Marcus and the video team, who will brief me on the key issues and discussions that take place during today's forum. I know my fellow commissioners are likewise very interested to hear about today's discussions and to similarly review any written submissions that we hopefully receive from stakeholders, all of you around the table today, during our consultation period. On that note, I think I am handing over to Marcus Crudden, who will facilitate the forum. So can I say thank you again, everyone, for attending and take care. Thanks very much, Marcus. Over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to everyone attending today. The purpose of today's forum is to have a conversation about the Victorian Default Offer for 2022-23. We're keen to hear from you about any issues you'd like to explore further, so please post questions to make the most of this public forum. Given the forum is a conversation, we would also have a few questions for you later as well. But first, I want to run through some quick background information for anyone less familiar with the purpose of the default offer and our role. The Victorian Default Offer was introduced on the 1st of July 2019 as a simple, trusted and reasonably priced electricity option. It was designed as a safeguard for those consumers who are unable or unwilling to engage in the market. It was developed through significant consultation with a range of stakeholders, including community and consumer advocates, industry reps and expert advisors. Our approach has been to refine over time with input from consultations like these and from written submissions on our draft decisions. Have no doubt that what you say here today will be heard and taken account of. However, please also be aware that there are many other considerations that we must take on board when we make these decisions. While the basic formula for setting the default offer is largely settled, there are some issues that require closer examination. We will discuss these issues and any other matters you want to explore further during today's sessions. Today you'll hear from our acting project manager, Milestones, who will take you through our draft decision. Then we'll hear from Jeff Hargraves from Red Energy, Lumo Energy, followed by Jared Lane from the Victorian Council of Social Services. After those presentations, we'll move to a question and answer session at around 2:40 before wrapping up somewhere around about 3:15 to 3:30. I'll now hand over to Mayang to unpack our draft decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Hi, everyone. I'll briefly talk through the approach in general, discuss the issues we considered this time around, and then talk a bit on the draft decision prices. Our overall approach to estimate the Victorian Default Offer prices continues to remain the same as in the previous decisions. We follow a cost build-up approach to determine the prices. The network costs are calculated from the network tariffs approved by the AER, which are passed through. We estimate the wholesale costs using a futures market-based approach that's driven by trade-weighted contract prices. The environmental section comprises of costs to comply with government schemes and also the avoided social cost of carbon. The fourth major category is retail, which includes costs to operate and acquire customers and are based on publicly available cost benchmarks adopted by other regulators. Other costs, network losses, and a retail operating margin are then added to arrive at the default offer prices. Throughout our previous consultations, our stakeholders have generally supported the overall methodology in terms of how we build a cost stack and also how we address specific issues and make changes as necessary. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this time, based on the stakeholder submissions, we have proposed two minor changes in our draft decision. The first one is in wholesale, where we have used three most recent years of load data to forecast load profiles instead of 5 years previously. This is to better reflect the current relationship between demand and prices in the wholesale market, given the changing rooftop solar penetration. This would increase the average residential video bill in Victoria by $3. The second small change is in the network metering costs, which now calculates a customer weighted tariff from all metering types instead of a cheapest meter tariff. This is proposed to more accurately reflect the adoption of different types of meters by customers. Again, this would slightly increase the average bills by $3 for residential tariffs. Next slide, please. We also considered some other issues raised in submissions. The key issues were firstly the approach to calculate prices of Victorian energy efficiency certificates for the week. To ensure that the Victorian energy upgrade costs reflect efficient costs recovered from the customers in the long run, we continue to use trade-weighted prices over the last 12 months and have not proposed to change methodology. But we will update the price, all the prices close to the final decision to accommodate the latest price changes. Another issue was around costs to comply with the consumer data right regulations introduced in the energy sector. We have proposed not to include any adjustment as the impact based on the Commonwealth Treasury numbers is not material and cannot be accommodated within and can be accommodated within the current operating cost benchmark. Regarding the incremental impact of pandemic on the bad debts, we do not propose any additional adjustment this time based on the strong economic recovery, government indications of fewer restrictions in the future and publicly available information on retailers' bad debts. We note that there is a certain pre-pandemic level of bad debt that would already be included in the current operating cost, the benchmark. Moving on to the draft decision, next slide. The video rates proposed would lead to about 1% increase in average default offer bills for residential. This is based on the flat rate tariffs. However, the numbers will change once we update the costs closer to our final decision. And there might be a few changes due to new information coming to light. We note that the AER has approved 2 cost pass-throughs in the network costs for AusNet distribution zone. These would be reflected in the upcoming pricing proposals for the distribution zone. And AER estimates it would likely drive up the residential bills by $9 to $10. That is less than 1% of the annual bill for that zone. And it's also subject to other cost changes and recoveries. Next slide, please. And it's the same for small business customers, a 1% change in average bills in Victoria. To visualize where this default offer is placed in the market, this chart compares the default offers to the market offers. The bars show range of market offers available in all the previous quarters since 2018. The median market offer is represented by the pink dotted line. The proposed draft default offer is the orange dot towards the extreme right. And as we can see, it continues to be slightly above the median market offer. And this has been the case for all the previous default offers, which are the blue dots and lines as we go towards the left. This basically serves as a cross-check that there are competitive offers consistently sitting below the default offers. And next slide, please. And finally, just to reiterate the key milestones, the submissions close on the 12th of April. We aim to publish the final decision by 24th of May, and that will be effective from the 1st of July. That's it from me. Thanks everyone for being so patient, and I will now hand it over back to Marcus.
Thank you, Mayank, for taking us through those slides. We'll next hear, can I just take the opportunity to remind you that all the draft decisions is available for public feedback until April the 12th, as said by Mayank. We would encourage you to put forward written submissions through the Engage Victoria website, as well as raising issues today. I would now like to introduce Jeff Hargraves from Red Energy and Lumo Energy. Red and Lumo provide electricity to more than 1 million customers in Victoria, New South Wales, South East Queensland, South Australia, and the ACTU. So over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Marcus. And thanks to the Commission for the invitation to speak today and to offer a retailer perspective. There'll be a range of views amongst retailers, but I guess that'll come up later in questions perhaps. So if we could just jump to the next slide, please. Aside from this being a bit of a shameless plug, I guess we see ourselves as a good example of what competition in the retail market can produce. A different way of doing things, a different way of solving particular problems. So as Marcus said, we're a subsidiary of Snowy Hydro. We operate across the NEM. We have about 1 million customers. In Victoria, we commenced operations in 2004, and we were able to build a customer base by offering a competitive price and innovative service. And some of that occurred under price regulation and sometimes not. So we were one of the first retailers to offer pay on time discounts rather than late payment fees. We offered discounts off the entire bill. And we've won a number of CanStar awards. So as I said, we see ourselves as a bit of an example of what competition can produce and why regulators and price regulatory frameworks should account for the competition. It's not just about a different coloured bill, it's about encouraging efficiency in operations and new ways of interacting with customers. So next slide, please. So I guess the point, the broader point about price regulation is that it can be difficult to do, and our view remains a second best solution. Consequences of getting it wrong can be higher prices on average for consumers or retail failure and market disruption. And we note the experience in the UK at the moment where they've been in the face of rising wholesale prices. We've seen a number of supplier of last resort events, which are rollers for us, which have impacted about 4 million customers in the UK. I will apologise for the small typo there in the first bullet point. But we can see that this it's impacted a range of different retailers of different sizes. So the point is that price regulation can't insulate consumers from higher costs or from the disruption of retail failure. It also has the potential to negatively impact competition and disproportionately impact small retailers, and we think that comes at considerable cost. And I guess looking ahead, it will be interesting to see how price regulation can align with the expected direction of the market, and particularly the Energy Security Board's post-2025 market design work program, which envisages more engaged consumers who are participating in the market. So price regulation and is difficult to, and reference pricing in particular, is difficult to align with those sort of initiatives that we're likely to see. So next slide, please. So just some observations on our experience with the VDO to this point, and this includes this current draft, noting that it will be updated in line with more recent data. For the most part, we support the Commission's approach. It's demonstrated stability, consistency and predictability in its VDO determinations, and that includes this one as well, which reassures retailers that they are able to recover reasonable costs going forward and dispels any notion that there's, I guess, political considerations that enter into its decisions. We've seen the Commission, and it's the case in this time around, departs from its established position or includes additional items when it sees evidence and analysis and do it with plenty of notice for all stakeholders to contribute to. So data sets need to be fit for purpose. They need to account for differences in business structures of retailers of different sizes and acknowledge they're backward looking. So that means developing things like consistent definitions and mechanisms for allocating overhead, shared services, and new emerging costs like the new allocation of unaccounted for energy, for example. So back to my initial point about price regulation potentially compounding challenges for small retailers. So the ESC needs to proceed with caution. But in general, as a general point, we'd say the Commission is sticking with its established methodology, which we think is doing price regulation in as good a way as possible. So that's our perspective, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute and speak at the forum today.
Thank you, Jeff. Some very interesting reflections and observations there for us to continue. I guess the events in the UK are particularly challenging to look at from a distance. I do remind people there are provisions for reopening events and that under things like the VDO. While they're not sort of something we would hope to ever have to use, there are protections in the event. And as Jeff also said, with the pandemic, may have more twists and turns. Also assure everyone that we are speaking with both the AER and AEMO about the network charges and their fees, and we will take account of them in reaching the final decision. And I suspect the consumer data right will be one of those issues that a number of you will probably make submissions on and provide us with some data in response to the draft. So we certainly welcome that. And as Jeff noted, I guess we're very much an evidence and data driven in making these decisions. So I guess if you do have information, I'd really urge you to put it before us. Certainly you can on some of this put it before us on a confidential basis, and we'll respect that. But we will certainly take account of anything you want to raise on those issues. So I assure you of that. I'd now like to throw over to Jared Lane from the Victorian Council of Social Services. The Council is the peak representing body for Victorian social and community and one of Victoria's leading social advocacy agencies. I'd like to hand over to Jared and thank you for presenting on behalf of consumer groups today. And just a reminder, we'll come back to everyone for questions after Jared's presentation. So thank you, Jared.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jared Lenny. I'm the Energy Policy Advisor at the Victorian Council of Social Service. Again, like Jeff, I'd like to thank the ESC for the opportunity to participate today and happy to move on to the next slide and acknowledge country. I'm on Orangery people of the Kulin Nation's traditional lands, and I acknowledge their elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. It's a wonderful process to do at the start of each meeting. I think it helps us take a pause and connect with what we're doing in the places that we are. I think it's good for me to start with reinforcing VCOS's perspective on a process like this. As the peak body for the social and community services sector, our role is not to provide a detailed analysis of economic regulation or even consumer protection perspectives. We think about how the VDO sits within the system as a whole and what it looks like for the community sector organisations and the households on low income or experiencing disadvantage in managing their energy needs and well-being. We've been active in the energy policy context for a number of years. We recognise that energy-related equity issues are complex, systemic, and can often compound other forms of disadvantage. So I think it's worthwhile just putting that context there. Moving to the next slide. This is a visual that I use quite often to sort of tell the story of where the VDO sits within the overall consumer well-being and energy affordability picture. We won't spend a lot of time on it. For those who are looking for another version, we included it in our feedback on the payment difficulty framework implementation. I think the main point I really want to make here is that we've supported the introduction and the implementation of a default offer in the Victorian market. We recognise that many consumers are not able to engage in the way that the system inherently expects them to. And so it's important that there's clarity and both a simple trusted price and effectively a reference price. And so I think this slide for me is a useful way of understanding what we expect from the VDO in the context of the other market-based and complementary tools that help all Victorians enjoy household energy, and that's a key step to fundamental wellbeing from a whole of community perspective. So happy to move on from that. I'll come back to it later. As has been outlined today, I think there's largely unchanged methodology for this year's default offer price, driven by increase in the wholesale electricity projections. I think it's always worth remembering that it is directly relevant to a large number of households, both as their current electricity tariff, but also in embedded networks and then the market-wide reference role. I suppose the one thing I wanted to flag here particularly is if we take a longer-term view, this is, depending on how you count it, the 8th or 9th consultation on methodology and operations of the VDO in the last 3 to 4 years. So that's an opportunity for us to do a bit of a stock take on what have we been saying over that time, and perhaps it's an idea for the ESC in future consultations to keep a bit of a progress log on issues that have been raised and where they're up to. And I think Jeff was right to point out the parallel process that we're all aware of, the Order and Council review. This is just a general observation, really. It's policy 101 from a peak body perspective. But it's important that we don't lose any issues between the two processes, but rather it's an opportunity to make sure there's some genuine collaboration on what's working well and what could be even better. Thank you, Nitul. So this slide, again, should be no surprises, I think, from a attendee's perspective. These are things that VCOS or other community sector organisations have highlighted in past decisions. As Jeff was flagging, consistency has been very important in the methodology, but getting that balance on both the metering issue cost and the wholesale formula, there's that balance between integrity and vigilance on the reform intentions. Mindful of some of the interesting insights that Jeff provided there on cost benchmarks. One of the issues that's been in previous submissions has been the idea of a productivity factor over the top of the cost benchmarks, because otherwise they will tend to creep up over time. Retail margins, as we compare them across other jurisdictions and other regulated prices, Victoria in this context is still at the upper range. So that's just one we'll keep an eye on. And I think noting comments from Jeff on the customer acquisition price component in the post-energy fairness plan era, it's important to maintain discipline on modest costs. That's a pretty important part of the overall picture. I'll be interested in any further discussions, and Jeff's views were helpful on this in terms of how a network time of use VDO has worked in the last 6 months and any consumer studies that the ESC has done. I'm still personally wrapping my head around a little bit how the time of use VDO adds to the existing flat VDO and the maximum annual compliant bill VDO, whether we've ended up with more measures than clarity there, or whether that's been a necessary nuance, given that the compliant annual maximum bill was always doing a bit of a clarity piece and reference price for situations where households had retail tariffs that were different. It's not necessarily as straightforward, I think, as we may have assumed, to directly pass the network cost on to a retail price. But that's just a personal clarification. All of these, as I say, familiar observations, and they're preliminary at this stage. We're interested to hear how the conversation develops today and look forward to making submission in coming weeks. That's the main summary. Marcus, I may have burnt through that, but I thought it was better to speak to it quickly and give everyone a chance to have a longer conversation.
Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate your comments and insight. And it's quite scary when you think there's been 8 or 9 consultations in 4 years because of the various mixtures of 6-month and 12-month VDOs for changes from financial to calendar year to financial year. So, I guess there's been a lot, and perhaps some of you come in some of these sessions and based on we're discussing the same things every 6 months. Perhaps some of the issues have become fairly bedded down, but new issues emerge, and the issues of the pandemic. And I guess we've had sort of new issues as Jared's raised there, like the changes in underlying network costs and pricing structures that sort of impact into the future. What I'd like to do now is really open up if there's any questions and answer sessions. Just a reminder, you can ask questions by typing them into the chat box or raising your hand. Keep your microphone muted until you're called on to speak, just so you don't get a ton of feedback through the room, and minimise background noise. We'll start with some questions received in response to the survey we sent out. But also, if there's any questions anyone wants to ask of the Commission, but of Jeff or of Jared, feel free to those. While you're sort of getting your thoughts together, anything you want to raise, we'll kick off with just a couple that came in early from the survey we sent out. Today we have Dean Wickerton, who's the Senior Regulatory Manager in the pricing area available, but we also have Jeff Sapphire from the Victorian Energy Upgrades Division. I know the environmental costs associated with the VEETs is one that a number commented on the draft. So if there's any comments for Jeff on what's happening with the VEET prices as well, we'll be happy to take them. So one issue, Dean, was what period is used for inflation and how will that be taken account of in the final decision?
Thanks, Marcus. We just roll forward inflation with the Australian Bureau of Statistics Consumer Price Index each year. So basically they've taken, for the purposes of retail costs, the benchmark was established, I think, in 2017 or thereabouts. Mayank, you can confirm what that is. And then just rolled forward with the ABS index over that period. So the same process will be undertaken for the final decision. That, in simple terms, is the approach to inflation.
Yes, that's correct, Dean. That is. Sorry, Marcus. Just adding to what Dean said. The retail operating cost benchmark, for example, that's based on the 2017. So that's how we roll forward the CPI using the ABS numbers. Thank you.
Thanks. Randall Brown, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question? Can you just tell us who you want to address it to?
Yeah, thanks. Question for Mayank, perhaps. Going along the lines of what Jeff raised with regards to CDR costs, Momentum did submit our costs for that change for the initial costs. And while they're not significant, the CDR is going to cost a significant amount of money going forward. And we're pleasing to hear, I hope it's going to reflect it, a comfort that those costs will be recovered, because there's a little bit of a trend in the market now where we're getting lots of new regulatory impositions that have significant costs but deliver no benefits. And these changes haven't been brought in with proper cost benefit analysis. And we seem to be just getting lumbered with new costs. If you talk about NEM switching, CDR, 5-minute settlement, global settlement, there's lots of new changes coming in based on other drivers, which I'm unaware of, but they deliver no benefit to retailers, just significant costs. And while we submitted costs, I'm just wondering that, is that others may not have submitted exact costs, but is that a thing that you're looking for, that on every submission is significant costs from every retailer, or if it's only 1 or 2 retailers, the costs are submitted, you ignore them? Or what's the future now with these major regulatory provisions are being imposed on retailers?
Look, at a high level, we do tend to look for these, and we will look for the data and information that's submitted, and we will take account of it. I think we would like some further data, so I'm not sure whether many participants gave us data at the current point in time, but we'd certainly welcome more. Certainly if you've already submitted data, Randa, we'll take account of that with the other information we get in, so we're not asking you to account the second time. And we are, where there are regulatory changes and that, trying to look at what the impacts are. And certainly we're mindful of these things because they all do add up and impact on customers. And I think all of us are perhaps worried about cost of living and affordability, but perhaps Mayank or Dean, do you want to comment on what information we may want, or the type of information we'd like to see around the consumer data right?
Thanks, Marcus. Yes, I think The important question is we do look for information which is substantive, and also it can be from any one retailer or two or all of them, but it should be representative of the broader industry. When we look at that information, it generally, as Marcus said, when it makes sense on the general impact on the video, why this cost would add to the cost of the retailers to serve electricity. And yeah, feel free to jump in anytime, Dean. I think that's we will always be happy to get more information on cost. One example. Sorry, I'll just finish by saying one example is the 5-minute settlement costs, where we have taken or considered the information that we got either through publicly available sources or otherwise, but we have passed through in the video.
The costs are going to come in at different times for different retailers because of the timeline, with first tier retailers got to go ahead by, I think it's November 2022, and we're not till August or November 2023. So it is a little bit varying in when the costs are going to be imposed and at what time, but there's no doubt the costs are being incurred now and are going to ramp up quite significantly. This is a massive change. It's going to be very expensive and with no benefit for retailers, just cost. And that's the unfortunate thing, and that's why, hence I'm keen to see that they are going to be suitably reflected in the video.
Look, thanks, Randall. I assure you we will. Since we've released the draft, there's a few contact and make comments around it, so we will look closer at it between now and the final decision. So certainly welcome data and information and submissions on it. So yeah, we acknowledge, I think, as Jeff noted in there, that where we can get data and cost these things, we're certainly very open to including them in the cost stack. So thanks for the point, and we'll continue on with it. Andre, any other questions coming through? I think there might be. That's just a comment from David Caldery there, saying some of the larger banks' implementation costs exceeded 50 million each. Let's hope the energy won't be as high. Certainly we would hope as behalf of consumers it isn't as high as well, but we will take account of those. Perhaps we may look to some of the benchmarks from other sectors of what impact the consumer data right has had as well.
Marcus, if there's no questions, Jared raised the point about the maximum bill and the time of use video and then flat video. I'm just interested whether any retailers had any views on how that's working at the moment from their perspective, perhaps, if anyone was able to comment on that. Potentially it might be a bit hard to do anything with this video, but as we sort of work through future ones, perhaps.
Dane, I probably couldn't talk about specific experience, but I guess just the point about anything other than a flat tariff relies on assumptions about timing of use and volume of consumption at particular times and absolute levels of consumption over a 12-month period, which I guess the purpose of these price signals is to shift behaviour. So sometimes you're chasing a bit of a moving target to come up with, I guess, a reference price or a maximum allowable amount that is reasonable because you can see different responses. I know that's not a very helpful contribution. I guess that's back to my earlier point about how it's challenging to align price regulation and reference pricing back to more cost-reflective tariffs. And it's just going to become more and more of a challenge. So that's more a general point rather than specific observations, I think.
Thanks, Jeff. I might throw on Jeff Saffo, the environmental costs, particularly about the vape costs, have come up a bit and the methodology, but as I understand it, Jeff, there's been some easing off of the meat prices over the last month or so. Did you try to give a sort of general update on what's happening in the area?
That's right, Marcus. Yeah, there's been a bit of work being done sort of at the ESC and also at the sort of the government department level. Issued a number of sort of updates and so forth. And we've seen probably last month that the price has reduced significantly. Now, I have to say that sort of advisedly, the ESC doesn't have any pricing role in on the VU side. So we're just basing that on sort of anecdotal feedback and also our subscription to one of the sort of market traders. And so, but that does show that at the spot level, the price has decreased from the early 80s to sort of the mid 60s currently over the last 4 weeks. So I think for the retailers and for consumers, that's a good thing. So we'll just have to sort of do a bit of understanding on why that's the case. I do get asked quite a few times during the day, what's the reason for that? And as I said, we don't have the direct visibility of the pricing or even the forward contracts that participants will have with the retailers. So we can only guess, and I'm not going to sort of state what some of those reasons might be, because they would only be guesses. But yes, there has been sort of significant drop in the last few weeks compared to the historic highs that we've seen.
Thanks, Jeff.
Just on that, can I ask when Frontier closed the book on their calculations for, I guess, for those certificate prices and futures contracts or whatever it might be? I know the ESC has their process that they go through to make decisions. So it's some time before, quite some time before the Commission makes its final determination. But is that something you're able to disclose?
Andrew Hartford from Frontiers here. Andrew, are you able to update on that?
Yeah, yep. So so for the draft report, we looked at contract prices up until some date towards the end of January, and we'll be updating that for the final report, so that we haven't yet done that modelling, so we'll be taking into account prices up until some point sort of early in April or perhaps the end of March, but it'll be some point in the next week or two that we'll sort of cut off the price series and do the analysis.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, it's true, Jeff. It probably isn't as early, some of these cut-offs, as what you might think. I think we do kind of always work out what's about the last day we can get a report to actually do it, because particularly when there's a bit of volatility or anything in the market, trying to get as up to date as we can is pretty important from our perspective. And I think you noted yours, there's been some price movements in recent times, and in some of the other states there's been some very big price movements I've noted. Are there any other questions out there? I'm just scanning through to see if anyone's got their hand up. It doesn't look like there's any hands up at the moment. Is there any questions for ourselves, but also to Jeff or to Jared on any of the material today? Well, given there's not a lot of questions coming up, I'll move towards wrapping it up and reminding everybody that written comments in by the 12th of April through the Engage Victoria platform. We really are wanting material to come through. We really do take account of all the issues raised. I think Jeff for giving a really good overview today on a business perspective on the VDO, that there are many aspects that are becoming perhaps settled and somewhat agreed between us and yourselves, but there continues to be new and emerging issues. We will be alive to the issues that come up with AEMO fees and settling the network costs and monitoring the environmental costs. We'll also be, as said a couple of times, really looking for any further information we can find about the consumer data right, including that in the final submission. As always, if someone wants to kind of discuss some of these things privately or separately, you're more than welcome to get in touch with the team to take it through, or kind of discuss the type of information you may hold or be able to do it. I think we found today very valuable, and there's a lot of useful information we've come across. There is a challenge here of balancing all the competing interests. Again, we remind people that come up that the department is reviewing the pricing order in a general sense, and that's outside the ESC's role. So again, we encourage you to participate in those processes and provide input there as well. And I do recognise there's a lot of regulatory activity going on at the moment, so we'll try and minimise overlaps. But I really do think people contributing to the overall framework and making suggestions or improvements to the pricing order, and particularly some of those issues raised today about better coordination between the various regulatory agencies and the various processes. I know some of those can be a frustration and difficulty, so raising those in those processes can be quite useful to perhaps streamline some of the things. As I said, draft submissions on the decision by 12th of April. In closing, can I thank today's presenters, Mayank Grover from the ESC, Jeff Hargraves from Red Energy Lumo, and Jared Lenny from the Victorian Council of Social Services. We do appreciate the input and the time taken to prepare submissions and represent groups today. I'd also like to thank the Commission staff who have attended. I assure you we're taking account and notes and recording all this, so we will take account of those things that come up. I'll thank everybody for taking your time to attend the forum. Wish you all the best. Stay safe in this current environment, and we look forward to hearing from you further. Thank you.